Some wounds are invisible, yet they cut deeper than anything physical could ever manage. What happens when you give everything to the people you love, only to have them turn away when you need them the most? This is the story of Kate, a mother and grandmother, whose attempt to reconnect with her family ends in betrayal. But what if the greatest strength comes not from fighting back, but from walking away? Let me take you through this journey of heartbreak and silent power. I've always believed that family should come first. Growing up, my family wasn't perfect, but we had each other, parents, siblings, bonds that were unbreakable. When I married Mark, we promised to build something stronger, a legacy that would endure. But when Mark passed away last year, the foundation of my world crumbled beneath me. Alone and directionless, I found myself searching for something to fill the void. Maybe, just maybe, I could reconnect with my daughter, Ellie. She was my only child, after all, and I wanted to feel needed again. When Ellie and her husband, Nathan, bought a new house, I thought it was the perfect opportunity. To show I still cared, I paid off their entire mortgage. It wasn't just money, it was a symbol. A sign that I was still part of their world, still relevant. But when I walked into their home, Nathan, someone I had always thought kind, turned to me and said, "You smell like a hospital. Please don't sit on our new couch." The words hit me harder than I could have imagined. It wasn't about the couch, it was the way he spoke to me. The way he looked at me as if I was an inconvenience, a burden. I wanted to scream, to cry, but instead, I smiled through the hurt and left the room. After all, that's what a mother does, sacrifices her own feelings for the sake of her children. But as I walked away, something inside me broke. I had given them everything, my love, my time, my money, and this was how they repaid me. The weeks that followed were even worse. Every time I walked into their house, it was as if the air itself had thickened, the space between us growing not just physically, but emotionally. Nathan, my son-in-law, had never apologized, and Ellie, my own daughter, said nothing. It was as though the words I longed to hear, the acknowledgement of the hurt I had endured, simply didn't matter to them. I wasn't expecting grand gestures, but a simple apology, a moment of understanding, could have made all the difference. But no. The silence between us stretched long, cold, and heavy. Every visit to their home felt like an exercise in endurance, where each step I took further removed me from the family I once knew. It wasn't just the physical distance, the couch I was told not to sit on, or the coldness in their greetings, it was the emotional barrier they had erected around me. I was no longer a part of their world. I had become a stranger in a place I had once called home. And worse, I felt invisible. I could feel the weight of their indifference pressing down on me. The very people I had given my all to, who I had cared for and sacrificed for, now barely acknowledged my presence. At home, the silence was deafening. The walls of my house, once filled with the chatter of my family, now felt suffocating. I spent more time alone, crying in the stillness, not just for the events of that fateful day, but for all the years I had spent giving and giving, only to be left feeling unappreciated, like a shadow. I had poured so much of myself into them, my love, my energy, my time, and for what? To be discarded, treated like I didn't matter? I wondered what had happened to the woman I used to be, the woman who was full of life, who had hopes and dreams, and a family that would support her. Now, it seemed like I was invisible, a ghost drifting through a life I no longer recognized. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to rewind time to those moments when our house was filled with laughter, with warmth. Back when I could wrap my arms around my daughter and grandchildren and feel their love. I longed for those days, days when my family felt whole, and I was not just a mother and grandmother, but an essential part of the fabric that held us all together. But the more I tried to hold on to that memory, the more I realized how far gone it was. With every cold glance, every indifferent word, it became clearer to me that it was no longer possible to go back. And so, I began to ask myself, what was left for me? What had I truly built? I had been nothing more than a shadow in their lives, always there when they needed me, always ready to help, always sacrificing. But now, I was left standing in the dark, looking in from the outside, wondering how I had become so invisible to the people I loved most. The love I had poured into them, the sacrifices I had made, seemed to have been forgotten. And in the end, what had I received in return? Nothing but silence, and the painful realization that no one seemed to notice how much I had given. Then, one night, as I sat in my living room, the silence of my home pressing in on me, I couldn't help but stare out at the darkened street. The flickering streetlights outside barely broke the blackness, and inside, the stillness was suffocating. It was in that moment, as I watched the shadows shift in the empty space around me, that a thought struck me like a bolt of lightning. If I kept giving, if I kept begging for their love, I would only be stuck in this endless cycle of pain and self-sacrifice. I had been doing it for so long, pouring myself out, but I had nothing left to show for it. I had become so entangled in their lives, in their needs, that I had lost sight of my own. I had become invisible, a silent martyr, endlessly giving, yet never receiving. The truth was, I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't be the person who constantly bent over backward for everyone else, asking nothing in return, only to be treated like I was irrelevant. I had always told myself that my sacrifices would be appreciated, that one day the love I gave would come back to me when I needed it most. But that day had never come. And with each passing day, the realization grew stronger. I had to change. I had to stop waiting for them to notice me. I couldn't continue to be the doormat, the one who allowed herself to be trampled on just to keep the peace. That night, as the clock ticked on in the background, I made my decision. I wasn't going to play the role of the doting mother and grandmother anymore. I wasn't going to be the woman who just kept giving until there was nothing left. It was time to take control of my life again. It was time to make them see me, not just as a source of help and support, but as someone who deserved respect and recognition. It wasn't going to be easy. I had spent my whole life believing that family was everything, that the love and care I gave would be returned in kind. But it wasn't. And I could no longer keep sacrificing my own happiness, my own dignity, for people who couldn't even see the damage they were doing to me. The next morning, I took the first step. I stopped paying the mortgage. It wasn't just a financial decision, it was a statement. A declaration to them, and to myself, that I was no longer going to enable their disregard for me. For so long, I had thought that helping them with money, paying off bills, and solving their problems was my way of showing love. I had believed that if I kept doing these things, they would recognize my sacrifices and appreciate me. But now, it had become clear that they were taking me for granted. They saw my giving as an obligation, not a gift. And that, more than anything, was what hurt the most. It wasn't easy, making that call. I had always been the one who fixed things, who kept everything running smoothly. But I couldn't keep doing it. I couldn't keep being the one they relied on to make things easier, while they treated me as though I was invisible. No more. I let the weight of my decision settle over me. I wasn't just making a financial move, I was changing the narrative. I was telling them, without words, that I wasn't going to be the person they could use to solve their problems anymore. This wasn't about the mortgage. It was about showing them that I was a person with my own needs, my own worth, and that I deserved more than to be just a convenience when things got tough. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this would drive them further away, or if they would finally come to their senses. But I knew one thing for sure, I had taken back control. And no matter what came next, I wouldn't be going back to the woman I had been before. This was the beginning of something new. It was time for them to see me, not as a source of endless giving, but as someone who deserved respect. For weeks, I heard nothing. No calls. No texts. The silence between us was suffocating, like a heavy blanket smothering any hope of reconciliation. It was as though I had been erased from their lives, a forgotten relic of a past they no longer cared to remember. But deep down, I knew they had to feel it, the absence of my presence in their lives, the pressure of no longer having me to fix everything. I was no longer the one they could call when things went wrong, the one they could rely on to clean up the messes they didn't want to deal with. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized it still wasn't enough. The silence, the distance, it wasn't enough to make them see the true cost of their actions. I had given them everything, and all I had received in return was indifference. It wasn't about the money anymore, or the house. It was about the years of sacrifice, the countless moments of selflessness that had been taken for granted. The silence had been my first step, a powerful, deafening message that I was no longer going to be the person who gave without question. Now, it was time for them to feel the consequences of their neglect. I thought about how they must be living, how they might be feeling. I wondered if they missed me, if they even noticed the hole I had left. I wasn't going to reach out. Not this time. They had to come to me. They had to realize that I wasn't just a person who existed to solve their problems, to pick up the pieces when they fell apart. I was a person with my own needs, my own feelings, and my own worth. The silence was not a sign of weakness, as they might have thought. It was my strength. It was my way of making them face the reality of their actions, making them understand that love isn't a one-way street. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Ellie finally reached out. Her message was simple, almost too simple. "Mom, why aren't you paying the mortgage? We need your help." The message cut through the silence, but it didn't have the effect she thought it would. I didn't rush to respond. I sat with her words for a moment, letting the sting of them settle in. She didn't ask how I was doing, didn't wonder about my feelings, didn't acknowledge the pain I had endured. She just wanted help. Just like before. But that was the problem, wasn't it? It wasn't about the money anymore. It was never really about the money. This was about respect, about recognizing the value of the person I was, not just what I could provide. This was about making sure they understood that I wasn't just a lifeline they could call when they were in trouble. I was their mother. I was a person. So, I replied with calm resolve, "When you're ready to listen, we can talk." And just like that, the ball was in her court. The silence had done its job. It had made them notice me. But it was up to Ellie now to come to me with an open heart, to truly listen and understand what I had been trying to say all along. I had already given enough. The next move was hers. I wasn't going to beg for love or validation anymore. I had taken my stand, and now, I would wait. I would wait for her to come to the realization that everything I had done, every sacrifice, every ounce of love, was not just an obligation, but a gift. The silence had broken, but the real work was just beginning. It wasn't just about the mortgage, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my respect, and my place in the family. It was time for them to see me, not as a provider, not as someone they could rely on when things were tough, but as a person worthy of love and respect, just as they were. The calls and messages from Ellie began to increase, but with each one, the desperation in her words grew more apparent. It was no longer just about the mortgage. It was about something deeper, something unspoken that had been festering beneath the surface for far too long. Nathan wasn't going to let me go without a fight. I could feel it in every word Ellie wrote, in the frantic tone of her voice when she called. He was pushing harder now, desperate to regain control, but I wasn't backing down. Not now, not after everything that had happened. It became clear to me that we were getting closer to the moment when they would have no choice but to face the truth that things could no longer go on as they had been. No more pretending. No more silence. They were going to have to look at what they had done to me, to our family, and finally acknowledge it. Then, one day, Ellie finally admitted it. Her voice trembled on the phone as she spoke, barely able to keep her composure. "Mom, Nathan is furious. He says you're forcing him into a corner, he's threatening to leave. He's not handling this well. He says you betrayed him." I could hear the conflict in her voice, the battle between the love for her husband and the love for her mother. But it wasn't about Nathan anymore. It wasn't about his anger, or his control, or his demands. It was about Ellie. For the first time in what felt like forever, I realized that Ellie was starting to see the truth. She was starting to see Nathan for who he really was, and not who he had convinced her he was. The walls she had built around herself were beginning to crumble. I waited, watching as she fought with herself, trying to hold on to the family she thought she knew, even as it fell apart before her eyes. And then, something incredible happened. Ellie finally stood up for herself. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a grand confrontation. It was quieter, but no less powerful. She called me one evening, and I could hear the shift in her voice. "Mom," she said, the words slipping out like a confession, "I don't think I can do this anymore. I don't know what happened to us, but he's not who I thought he was. He's been manipulating me. I can see that now. I was blind, but not anymore." The weight of her words hit me like a wave. She finally saw through the lies. She finally saw through the manipulation. After everything, after all the years of me silently bearing the weight of her choices, Ellie was awakening to the truth of what had been happening in their home. And in that moment, I knew we had crossed a line. No matter how hard Nathan tried to control her, no matter how much he pushed, Ellie wasn't going to let him anymore. She was going to fight back. She wasn't the woman I had raised, the woman who had accepted her place in a marriage where she had been belittled and dismissed, not anymore. She was going to take back control of her life. She was going to stand up for herself, against Nathan, against the world, and against everything that had been holding her down. The relief I felt in that moment was overwhelming. It was like a dam breaking. The years of frustration, of feeling unseen and unheard, of being dismissed and used, were finally starting to fall away. And yet, I knew the hardest part was still ahead of us. Nathan wouldn't go down without a fight. He would fight for control, for his version of the life he wanted. But now, Ellie wasn't going to let him manipulate her into submission. She had finally seen the truth. The real battle had just begun. The next time I saw Ellie, she was different, stronger, more resolute. There was a fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The woman who had once been lost in the shadows of Nathan's control was now standing tall, unafraid to face the truth. We both knew that the hardest part was still ahead of her. Nathan wasn't going to let go without a fight. But the decision had been made. Ellie was no longer trapped in a life built on lies and manipulation. I had done my part in helping her see the truth, and now, the weight of her own courage was carrying her forward. She was ready to stand on her own 2 feet. The strength I had given her, the quiet push to find her own voice, had worked. It had broken the chains that had held her captive for so long. But now, the responsibility was hers to carry. Nathan's control was slipping, and he would do whatever it took to get it back. But no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he fought to maintain his grip on her, he wouldn't succeed. Not anymore. I walked out of her house that evening, feeling a sense of release, as though I were shedding a weight I had carried for far too long. The past, the years of sacrifice, of being unseen and unheard, all seemed to melt away. The air around me felt lighter. And as I stepped into the night, I realized something profound. I had given everything to my family. Every ounce of love, every part of me that I could offer, I had given. But now, it was time to take control of my own life. It was time to put myself first. And when they finally realized the power of my silence, the power of my choice to stop enabling them, it would be too late. I had already moved on. I had already found my strength, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me again. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Your support means everything to me. Leave a comment below and tell me how you feel about the journey we've been on. Share your thoughts, because your voice matters. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand in silence.